Sarah's world went black in an instant. One moment, she was laughing in her kitchen, the next, she was dead. But death wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. She didn't just die once. She died 3 times. Each time, she crossed into eternity. First to heaven, then to hell, and finally, to the terrifying vision of Judgment Day. Now, she's back with a warning. Time is running out. Will you be ready? Here is her personal testimony.
My name is Sarah, and what I am about to tell you will shake everything you thought you knew about life, death, and eternity. I never imagined I would be the one sharing this story. I was just a normal girl, 21 years old, in college, juggling classes, friends, and the everyday struggles of life. I had heard about heaven and hell growing up, but I never gave it much thought. To me, the afterlife was a mystery, something distant and uncertain. That all changed the day I died. Not once, not twice, but 3 times. Each time, I left this world. Each time, I saw things beyond human comprehension. And each time, I came back with messages that haunt me to this day. Before my first death, I was skeptical of anything I couldn't see or prove. Science had answers for most things, and anything beyond that, I simply didn't worry about. Like many people, I believed in something out there, but I had no idea how real, how terrifyingly real, the spiritual world truly was. I lived my life the way most do, assuming I had plenty of time to figure it all out later. But time is an illusion. We never really know how much we have left. My first brush with death came out of nowhere, in a moment that should have been completely ordinary. I was laughing with friends 1 minute, and the next, my world went dark. My heart stopped. My body collapsed. The people around me panicked, paramedics were called, and for them, it was a desperate attempt to save my life. But for me, it was the beginning of something far greater. I left my body. At first, I hovered above, watching everything unfold from a strange, detached place. I saw the paramedics working frantically, my best friend sobbing, my mother screaming my name. But then, I was pulled toward something else, something so real, so overwhelming. It made everything I had known before feel like a dream. I entered a place of indescribable beauty. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, more vivid, more alive than the world I had left behind. I felt a peace so deep, so consuming, that every worry, every fear I had ever carried melted away. And then I saw him, Jesus. I knew him instantly, not because of paintings or stories, but because my soul recognized him. His presence was pure love, yet there was something else, something serious in his gaze. He had something to show me, something I was meant to understand. But before I could, I was ripped back into my body. I woke up gasping for air, surrounded by panicked faces. The world felt different, as if I no longer belonged. I had seen what lay beyond, but that was only the beginning. The warnings Jesus gave me were not just for me. They were for the whole world. It was supposed to be a normal day, nothing out of the ordinary. The sun was shining, and the air was warm with the scent of spring. I had just finished a morning jog, feeling strong, energized, completely alive. But within hours, my world would come crashing down. I was in the kitchen, laughing with my mom as I poured myself a glass of water. That's when it happened. A sudden, sharp pain gripped my chest, so intense that I dropped the glass. My vision blurred, the walls around me seemed to close in, and before I could even cry out for help, everything faded into darkness. I don't remember hitting the floor. I don't remember my mom screaming my name, shaking me, begging me to wake up. But I do remember what came next. I was floating. At first, I didn't understand what was happening. I was weightless, suspended in the air above my own body. I saw my mom kneeling beside me, sobbing, dialing 911 with trembling hands. I watched as paramedics burst through the door, pushing her aside as they desperately tried to revive me. One of them pressed his fingers against my neck, shaking his head. "She has no pulse," he said. I should have felt fear. I should have panicked. But I didn't. Instead, I felt something else, a pull, like an unseen force was guiding me upward. And then I saw it. A light. It started as a soft glow in the distance, but it rapidly grew brighter. It wasn't just light, it was alive. It pulsed with warmth, love, and something I can only describe as belonging. It wasn't calling to me with words, yet I knew, deep in my soul, that I was meant to follow it. I surrendered to the pull. The moment I passed through, everything changed. I was standing in a place so breathtakingly beautiful that words fail to do it justice. Colors were richer, more vivid than anything I had ever seen. The sky above me shimmered, not just with light, but with music, a symphony that seemed to vibrate through my very being. The air itself was filled with peace, as if every worry, every fear I had ever carried had been lifted. And then I saw them. People. Not strangers, but loved ones who had passed before me. My grandmother, who had died when I was a child, stood there beaming, her eyes full of warmth. My uncle, who had lost his life in an accident years ago, waved as if no time had passed. They radiated joy, not the kind we experience on Earth, but something deeper, more whole. I ran to them, but before I could reach them, everything stilled. A presence more powerful than anything I had ever encountered filled the space. I turned, and there he was. Jesus. His light outshone everything around him, yet it didn't blind me. His face was both familiar and unlike anything I had ever seen, majestic yet humble, powerful yet gentle. His eyes held eternity within them, filled with love so overwhelming that it brought me to my knees. I couldn't speak. He stepped forward, and without words, I felt his thoughts flow into me. "Welcome, my child." His voice wasn't just something I heard. It resonated within me, in my heart, in my soul. I wanted to stay. I wanted to sink into the love radiating from him, to never leave this place of perfect peace. But then, a shift. The warmth of his presence remained, but his eyes took on a seriousness I hadn't noticed before. "You must return," he said. "Your time is not yet complete." Return? My heart ached at the thought. "But why?" I asked. "I feel whole here." He knelt before me, his gaze never leaving mine. "Because your purpose is not fulfilled. There is still more for you to do." His expression softened. "But remember this, love is the greatest commandment. Let love be the foundation of all that you do." I didn't want to go back. I knew what awaited me on the other side: pain, struggle, doubt. But Jesus extended his hand, and as soon as I reached for it, I fell. The light vanished. The music faded. And suddenly, I was gasping for air, surrounded by chaos. "She's back," a voice shouted. I blinked, my vision swimming with blinding hospital lights. Doctors and nurses hovered over me, their faces etched with shock. My mother was there, clutching my hand, sobbing. "Sarah," she choked. "You were gone. They said you were gone." I was too weak to respond, but my mind was racing. I had just been there. I had just seen him. And now I was back, trapped in a body that suddenly felt so fragile, so small compared to what I had just experienced. The doctors couldn't explain it. My heart had completely stopped for minutes, too long for me to come back without brain damage, let alone full consciousness. But here I was, alive, with my thoughts intact. Except I wasn't the same. I had touched eternity. I had stood before Jesus. And I had returned with something I could never forget: a message. A message that would change everything. It had been a year since my first death. A year since I had seen heaven, since I had stood before Jesus and felt his overwhelming love. I had spent that year questioning everything, trying to make sense of what I had experienced. I told myself I had been given a second chance, that I needed to live with love, to embrace my purpose. But life has a way of pulling you back into its distractions. At first, I was determined to change, to live the way Jesus had told me. But as time passed, the memories of heaven began to feel distant, like a dream slowly slipping from my grasp. I fell into old patterns, focusing more on temporary worries than eternal truths. I still believed, of course, but I told myself I had time. I was wrong. The second time I died, it wasn't as peaceful as the first. It wasn't a gentle collapse or a drifting away. It was violent. I had been experiencing strange episodes of dizziness and shortness of breath, but I ignored them. I was young. I was fine. But one evening, as I stood in my bathroom brushing my teeth, a sudden, unbearable pressure seized my chest. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before, a force crushing me from the inside out. My legs gave way, and I crashed onto the tile floor, gasping. I couldn't breathe. Panic surged through me as my vision tunneled. I clawed at the floor, trying to stay conscious, but the darkness swallowed me whole. And this time, I didn't rise into light. I fell. It was immediate. One moment, I was slipping into unconsciousness, and the next, I was plummeting, dragged downward at a speed that made my stomach lurch. The air around me grew thick, heavy, suffocating. The warmth I had felt before was gone. This was different. This was wrong. I landed hard, but not on solid ground. It was like sinking into a pit of ash, something shifting and writhing beneath me. The air was dense, filled with a stench that burned my throat, rotting flesh, sulfur, decay. And then came the sounds. Screams. Not just cries of pain, but wails of absolute despair. I turned, and that's when I saw them. Shadowed figures twisted and contorted, their faces locked in expressions of agony. They reached out, clawing at the air, their voices mingling in a chorus of suffering. Some were pleading, others cursing. The worst were those who didn't speak at all, who simply wept in silence, lost in the torment of their own regrets. I wanted to move, to run, but I couldn't. The weight of something unseen pressed down on me, as if the very air was alive with sorrow. I wasn't supposed to be here. A force stronger than gravity pulled at me, dragging me deeper into the darkness. I screamed, but my voice was lost in the chaos. The shadows around me moved. They weren't just figures, they were souls, lost and suffering, trapped in a place with no escape. I felt something brush against me, a hand, no, a claw, grasping at my ankle. I kicked away, horror consuming me. This wasn't a nightmare. This was hell. Terror unlike anything I had ever known gripped me. I had to get out, I had to get out. And then, through the darkness, came light. It was different from before, not the soft glow of heaven, but a commanding, undeniable force. The shadows recoiled as he appeared. Jesus. His presence dominated the space, and for the first time, the screams quieted. The darkness trembled before him, but it did not disappear. I fell to my knees. Please, I gasped. Get me out of here. His eyes, still filled with love, but now carrying a weight of grief, locked onto mine. You need to see, he said. He lifted his hand, and suddenly, the veil between me and the suffering souls was lifted. I saw who they were. Mothers, fathers, sons, daughters. People who had lived just like I had, believing they had time, believing they were good enough on their own. People who had ignored the warnings, who had chosen the temporary over the eternal. Some were those who had outright rejected God, denying him, mocking him. But others were people like me. People who had believed in him but had been lukewarm. People who thought they had time to turn back later. They hadn't. I saw their faces twisted in horrified realization. Their regret was suffocating, heavier than the darkness itself. I wanted to turn away, but Jesus' voice commanded my attention. This is not punishment. This is consequence. His words shook through me like thunder. I did not send them here. They chose this. I sobbed. But why? Why can't they leave? His expression was sorrowful. Because they never wanted me. Not really. A scream tore through the silence. I turned and saw a man on his knees, begging. Please, just one more chance. Let me go back. Let me warn them. Jesus' voice was steady, but firm. They had their chance. The time to choose me is in life. Not after. His words crushed me. The finality of it. The terrifying reality that these souls, these people, had already made their choice. And they would never leave. The weight of it was unbearable. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This was real. This was forever. Jesus turned to me, his expression grave. The world is full of deception. They believe they have time, but time is running out. I felt my soul cry out. Then let me warn them. Everything went black. I gasped awake in a hospital bed. My mother was clutching my hand, her face streaked with tears. Doctors stood over me, stunned. I had flatlined. For 6 minutes. They had been preparing to call my time of death when, out of nowhere, my body had jolted, my heart had started beating again. But I wasn't the same. I had seen hell. I had heard their screams. And I had returned with a warning. After my second death, I knew I could never live the same way again. I had seen heaven. I had seen hell. There was no more room for doubt, no more time for hesitation. I spent every waking moment telling people what I had experienced. I spoke at churches, shared my testimony online, and warned everyone who would listen time is running out. Some believed me. Others dismissed me. But I didn't care. I had seen too much to stay silent. Then, one night, I felt it. An overwhelming sense of unease crept over me, heavier than anything I had felt before. My heart pounded in my chest, though I wasn't afraid. It was something else, something I couldn't name. It felt as if a storm was coming, a shift in the very fabric of reality. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was just exhausted. But deep down, I knew better. Something was about to happen. Then, without warning, pain exploded in my chest. A searing, electric shock, unlike anything I had ever felt before. My breath hitched. My limbs went numb. I staggered forward, grasping at the table, my vision blurring. And then, just like before, I was gone. But this time, I didn't rise. I didn't fall. I was pulled. I felt my spirit being ripped from my body, carried by an unseen force faster than anything I had ever experienced. The world blurred, shifting and distorting around me. I tried to scream, but no sound came. Then, suddenly, I stopped. I was standing in the middle of a world I did not recognize. But it was Earth. It had to be. Yet, something was wrong. The sky above me was dark, but not with night. It was choked with smoke. The air smelled of fire, thick with ash and destruction. I turned, and what I saw sent ice through my veins. Cities in ruin. Buildings collapsed. Roads cracked open. People running, screaming, weeping. Chaos everywhere. The ground trembled beneath me, and I realized it wasn't stopping. Earthquakes. I looked up, and the sky split open. Flashes of light, not lightning, but something else. Something divine. And then I heard his voice. Jesus, this is what is coming. My breath caught in my throat. I saw floods swallowing entire coastlines. Fires consuming forests, homes, entire cities. Storms raging, winds howling with a fury I had never imagined. People screaming, pleading, but there was nowhere to run. And yet, in the midst of the destruction, I saw something even worse. People were turning away. Not just from the disasters, but from God. I saw churches empty, abandoned. People mocked those who still believed. A great deception had taken hold. Lies spread like poison, twisting the truth. I saw people worshiping something else, something not of God. It disguised itself as light, but I knew it was evil. Many will be led astray, Jesus said. They will choose lies over truth, darkness over light. I wept. I wanted to stop it, to scream at them, to shake them awake. But they couldn't hear me. And then I saw it. I was standing before a great, endless throne. Millions, billions of souls stood before it, faces full of dread. I saw them step forward, one by one, each standing before a brilliant light that revealed everything, every thought, every action, every hidden sin. No lies, no excuses. Some fell to their knees in shame, sobbing, begging for mercy. But it was too late. I turned and saw others, those who had followed Jesus, who had lived in truth. Their faces glowed with joy, with peace. They were welcomed. But the others? I watched as some were cast into darkness. Not by force, not by punishment, but because they had chosen it. They had rejected him. They had spent their lives believing they had time. They didn't. I felt my soul shatter. Jesus, I sobbed. Please, let me warn them. He turned to me, his eyes filled with sorrow, but also urgency. The world is asleep, he said. They do not see what is coming. I trembled as he stepped closer. Tell them, time is short. They must choose me now. The words burned into me, deeper than anything I had ever known. And then I gasped. I was back. Alive. The beeping of machines filled the hospital room. My mother was sobbing beside me, clutching my hand. Nurses rushed around me, shouting medical codes. I had died again, but this time I knew I had been sent back with a mission. I couldn't waste another second. Time was running out. Coming back after my third death was different. The first time I had returned with wonder. The second time I had returned with fear. But this time, I came back with urgency. Nothing looked the same. The world felt hollow. Everything people worried about, money, status, their next vacation, it all seemed so trivial. I wanted to grab them by the shoulders and shake them awake. Couldn't they see? Didn't they understand? Time was running out. But that was the hardest part. They didn't understand. At first, I tried explaining it to my family. My mother, still shaken from nearly losing me, listened intently, her eyes full of concern. My father nodded but said little. My friends? Some were curious, asking cautious questions, but others just smiled politely and changed the subject. You've been through a lot, one of them told me. Maybe you just had a really intense dream. A dream. I wanted to scream. I had seen hell. I had seen souls being judged. I had heard Jesus himself say that people were running out of time, and they thought it was just my imagination. I could feel the frustration building inside me, but I knew anger wouldn't help. Jesus hadn't sent me back to argue. He had sent me back to warn. So I spoke. Even when people dismissed me, even when they rolled their eyes, even when I lost friends. I started sharing my testimony at churches, online, anywhere people would listen. Some were moved to tears. Others walked away. But I kept going because I had seen eternity, and I couldn't let another soul walk into it unprepared. If there is one thing I need you to understand, it's this. Complacency is the enemy. People think they have time. They assume they'll have a chance to turn to God later. They convince themselves that as long as they're a good person, everything will be fine. But that's the biggest lie. I saw it with my own eyes. Death does not wait. It doesn't come when you're ready. It doesn't give you time to fix your mistakes. One moment, you're here. The next, you're standing before eternity. And by then, your choice has already been made. Jesus showed me the greatest deception Satan has ever spread, the lie that hell isn't real. That it's an exaggeration, a myth, a scare tactic. But I am here to tell you, hell is real. I heard the screams. I saw the regret, the horror, the hopelessness. The souls there weren't just suffering. They were tormented by the truth that they had ignored the warnings while they were alive. Hell is worse than any nightmare. But here's the good news, it's not too late. As long as you have breath in your lungs, Jesus is offering you mercy. He isn't waiting to condemn you, he's waiting to save you. But you have to choose him now, not later. Now, we must live with love, faith, and urgency. Not just believing in Jesus, but following him. Not just hearing the truth, but living it. Because one day, sooner than we think, time will run out. I was given a second chance. But not everyone gets that. I died 3 times. I stood before Jesus. I saw heaven, I saw hell, and I saw the future. And now I'm here, telling you this because he sent me back to warn you. If you died tonight, where would you go? Would you stand before God ready? Or would you be one of the souls crying out for one more chance? This is not about fear. This is about love. Jesus doesn't want you to perish. He doesn't want you lost in deception. He wants you. He died so that you could live. He has been calling you, waiting for you, but he won't force you to choose him. That choice is yours. And one day, sooner than you think, your time will be up. Do not wait. Do not gamble with eternity. Jesus is reaching out to you, even now. Listen. Surrender. Choose him. Because as he told me before he sent me back, I am waiting. Come to me.